Hello everyone, and welcome back to DMG. Recently, we've looked at some thin clients for retro gaming, and I don't mean DOS, I mean Windows XP early 2000s era. However, we did quickly find that only a newer model of thin client is really powerful enough to run older games of this era. If you actually want a good experience, that is. We did look at a thin client from the mid-2000s. However, it was not quite powerful enough to handle most 3D games we tried to play on it. So what if you still want a computer smaller than small form factor, but you still want it to be era appropriate? You still want a 2000s computer. Well, although you can't quite go with a thin client, you can get pretty darn close. This is the Compaq Elite 8000 ultra small form factor, and this is about as small as a fully fledged desktop computer could get in the late 2000s. This is quite powerful for its size. It'll take you can stuff a 1 terabyte SSD in there. It'll take a quad-core processor and 8 gigabytes of RAM. So the upgrade potential is huge, although the machine is not. It's quite small. It even has holes for mounting it to the back of a monitor. And it's really not that heavy either. This is an adorable yet quite powerful little system, so I'm very excited to talk about it today. Let's get right into it. So as I mentioned, this is the Compaq 8000 ultra small form factor. HP still makes these, like not this exact model, but as far as I know, until very recently at least, they've made computers in this exact size with almost the same motherboard. I've worked on them frequently, but this is the first one that really looked like this. There was an earlier Core 2 Duo one, silver. Wouldn't recommend that one, honestly. Had a little less ventilation. But this one is pretty much the furthest back you can go if you want a fully fledged computer in a tiny box. And I'll show you the inside in just a minute, but we'll start with our standard ports. So here is the power jack. It does not have its own internal power supply. It needs a 135 watt power brick. Don't get an aftermarket one. Buy a used high-end laptop brick off of eBay. Make sure you get a make sure you get an HP one, not a Dell one. So why I say don't get an aftermarket one is this does use all of the 135 watts that those chargers can put out. So if you buy like an aftermarket charger, first of all, that could be pretty unsafe if it gets overloaded, but it might not be able to even run the machine. Here is the VGA port, and it also has DisplayPort hooked up to its onboard graphics. We've got a generous amount of USB ports, 6 USB 2 on the back, gigabit LAN through an Intel chipset, PS2 keyboard mouse, audio out and audio in, of course, and a tiny little fan. Spinning it around on the front, we've got the air intake over on the left, a DVD rewritable drive here, a little more air intake, power button, indicator LEDs, 4 more USB ports, combo headphone and mic or headset, and headphone. So it's very well featured in I/O. It has actually about twice the holes you can plug things into as one of these thin clients do. So speaking of holes, let's go ahead and open this little guy up. The panel just comes off of the top like it would, any other laptop. And on the inside, the metal is actually braced for VESA mounting it to a monitor. Here's the inside. It's a little tight in here. So here is the front fan. It's rather small, but this heatsink is able to cool the processor quite well. I've done stress tests, all sorts of things. Never seen this go above the low 70s, high 60s. And this fan is not whiny, it's not particularly loud, but it still is louder than the silent fanless thin clients, keep in mind. Here is your chipset heatsink here in the middle. That's for your north bridge. Your south bridge is over here under the optical drive. There are your 2 RAM slots. They're DDR3. So in the manual, it says the supported max is 8 gigabytes, but I bet you could stick 16 in there if you tried. The front panel comes off, and you will need to do that to remove the optical drive. Why are we removing the optical drive? Because, well, it's blocking what we actually want to look at. Ah, crap, I just knocked over a ton of CDs. But here is our little optical drive, and under it is this neat mechanism that releases the hard drive. Now this caddy can actually fit a 15 millimeter high performance hard drive, and it nicely slides in to the little SATA caddy down here. Unfortunately, there is no spare SATA port in this machine for adding another hard drive, but it's not really a problem because when you think about it, there's nowhere you could put another hard drive. Every inch of this machine is used. There is no wasted space. You don't get any expansion slots. No PCI, no PCIe, no MXM, none of that. Just like with the thin clients, because this is designed to be as compact as possible. After all, it is literally called Compaq. But let's get this little guy all snapped back together and plug it in so I can show you just what it can do. One more thing I should mention, this unit originally came with a Core 2 Duo E8400. That's a dual-core 3 GHz processor. Nothing wrong with it, but I knew I could push this a little further. So I bought a Core 2 Quad Q8400S. So that is a 2.6666666 GHz quad-core processor. And the S variant Core 2 Quads, they're a special denomination that only consumes 65 instead of 95 watts of power. So this is actually compatible with all of the S variant Core 2 quads up to the Q9550S. The Q8400S is a pretty fast chip. It's understandably between the laptop Q9100 and the desktop Q9550. Those are the 2 Core 2 quads on my bench list that it's closest to. So it's absolutely a solid little chip, and it brings this machine from, well, Core 2 Duo performance up to, first gen i7 up to third gen i5 performance levels down from down at Core 2 Duo. So it was only like a $15 processor. If you want that extra performance, absolutely recommend sticking in a Core 2 Quad, because there's a good deal more I can do with this now. But also, that makes it about 30 to 50% faster than this little guy in the CPU department, because this thin client is only about as fast as a 3 GHz Core 2 Duo. So this Core 2 Quad chip, although a little lower clocked per core, is still a big upgrade over Core 2 Duo performance levels. Well, anyway, I said no further ado, and then I did a lot of ado. So let's go ahead and plug this in before I forget and start talking more. I'm a big fan of HP's business products, as you can tell. I've got a bunch of them, but just look how tiny it is compared to even a small form factor, and well, of course, a full desktop.
This does have some things in common with the thin clients. They all take laptop hard drives and laptop RAM, and in this case a laptop optical drive, but this has a distinct advantage. It has a desktop LGA775 socket instead of just the soldered BGA lower-end laptop CPUs that the thin clients have. So that gives it a pretty big advantage in the CPU department, not only in performance but also in upgradability. As aforementioned, you can actually put a Q9550S in this thing. The chipset we have is the standard Q45 with a GMA 4500M HD, which that's a pretty standard chipset. Of course, here is our Q8400S processor and our GMA 4500M HD. This is a decent little chipset, but I don't know how it'll hold up to like full HD gaming. Also, I am running it on VGA, so it might look a little crusty. This does have a DisplayPort output, but the DisplayPort on my unit is broken, so it flickers, and that is really, really unpleasant to look at. So I figured you would rather have clear video that might look a little bit muddier than video that causes epilepsy. But let's go ahead and start off with Unreal Tournament 1999. I have a feeling that it'll be able to handle 1920 by 1080. I would actually be pretty surprised if it couldn't, since after all this is like a 2008-2009 iGPU chipset. And before anyone asks, this is back when the integrated graphics were on the motherboard, not on the CPU. So if you buy a higher end CPU, you have the same graphics. Interesting. So it's doing the thing where the game slows down a little. I have a feeling that has to do more with my capture card, because this isn't 100% compatible with every configuration on every video card, but it's not like frame drops or anything. It's just the game is running a little slower than it should. I've seen this happen before. For some reason, it's a somewhat common thing on Unreal Tournament 99 when it's unhappy with the resolution or video driver or that sort of thing. So this is an issue that is down to my monitor and capture card, to be clear. So this is not an issue with the actual Compaq, but I'm seeing absolutely no frame drops at all, and I think, yeah, this is running even better than the Radeon graphics, the Radeon R5E in the Wise 5060. Might as well go ahead and step it up to Unreal Tournament 2004 while we're on the topic of epic games. Epic James, he's a pretty cool guy, you know? Funny thing is, despite being the fastest, this actually feels the most sluggish because I have a hard drive in it instead of an SSD like I've put in the other thin clients. So it's funny, it should be the fastest, but it actually feels slower than the Wise 5060. So if you get one of these, of course, if you're running Windows 10, always SSD. Awesome! So the desktop GMAs are a lot faster than the laptop ones, but often even I tend to underestimate just how much better they are. So this is the performance you could expect from like a discrete NVIDIA chip in a laptop. Awesome. And just to show, we're running absolute maximum settings at 1920 by 1080. So just to make it a bit quieter for you, I'll go ahead and do that. But this is fantastic. This is running even better than I expected, and I'm pleased to report that okay, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't expect this to win over the Radeon graphics in the Wise 5060, but it looks like this older GMA chipset is actually faster. Of course, this machine consumes a lot more power. We're talking, 135 watts versus like maybe 20 to 30. And of course, it makes more noise. But it's not very loud, it's not whiny, and it's not particularly annoyingly loud. Getting one of these with like a 3 gigahertz dual core would probably only be like $40. Getting one of these with the quad core CPU that I have in there would be like, 50, 60. Okay, it seems, I feel like it's running Icetomb about as well as the Radeon graphics. Honestly, I think the Radeon might have won out a little in Icetomb, but I'd put that down to the memory amount and memory speed that the Radeon has at its disposal versus this chip. I think this only has like 256 megabytes, maybe? While the Radeon... No, maybe it only has 64. I should check that. We'll see how much memory... Hardware reserved 129 megabytes. So I'd assume that this GPU probably has 128 megabytes of video RAM, while the Radeon card had 512. So I feel like, although the card is faster, like the actual video chipset, the amount of memory is kind of holding it back. So of course you could do that by, fix that by decreasing the texture resolution a bit. It is a little silly to play at the absolute maximum on a computer if you don't want to spend a lot of money. But it runs Unreal Tournament 2004 quite well, and as you see, CPU load is quite low. Yes, it ran correctly. Let's do good old crappy Unity game. So I think this might use OpenGL instead of DirectX. So this GPU is clearly less good at whatever API this card is compatible with. Let's do them in order. Let's go for GTA Vice City first. All right, here we go. We're going all the way up to 1920 by 1080, and I won't turn the draw distance all the way up yet. It's more desirable to play at a full native resolution and lower graphic settings than try and crank the graphic settings all the way up. Okay, this seems to actually be running worse than the Radeon card. Alright, so it seems... it's absolutely running okay, but there's not like a big improvement over the Radeon card. It's interesting, it was running worse than the Radeon in the intro cutscene, but now it's running just about as well as the Radeon did. So, I think we all know what that means. It is time for more graphic. Okay, so now it's running a little worse, but this is still about how the Radeon handled. I would say that, again, the video memory at this card's disposal being a quarter of the Radeon's is really what's stopping it from being the faster GPU here, and its lack of API support. I believe the R5 supported DirectX 12, and I don't even know if this has unified shaders, so I think you're limited to DirectX 9. But even if you're not, especially if you're not playing newer games, that won't really be a huge problem though, will it? I want to cause explode so that I can look at how game look. Oh, there we go. It handled that just fine. I'm kidding. I did none of that as a gauge of GPU performance. I literally just like blowing things up in video games. Oops. Okay, so I see it's running just fine. Hello, bonk. So it's definitely about what you would expect from the Radeon card. So now, though, I feel like it's... Oops. We know it'll run that fine. So now, though, I feel like it's time for San Andreas. I think, personally, if you want a computer of this size, I would recommend one of the newer ones with like a 3rd, 4th gen CPU, because those still have socketed CPUs. Those are a good deal more expensive. They're like 70, 80 bucks for one of these. But, you know, oh, brutal. So the Radeon absolutely wins here. No contest. The Radeon card in the Wise 5060, and I think maybe even in the Z50S, is very much able to outperform the GMA here. And I have a feeling that's all down to video memory, because this has really not a lot of it. Because you saw how well it ran Unreal Tournament 99 compared to the other video cards. And it also ran Unreal Tournament 2004 on par with or better than the Radeon cards. But it really does depend on the game, what sort of performance you get. And also, AMD drivers are better optimized for gaming than Intel's GMA IGP drivers. So that's probably also a factor. I forgot to extract this, so let's do that right now. For anyone wondering, I do actually legally own a disc copy of Half-Life 2. However, just extracting a illegitimate portable version onto computers that I benchmark is a lot easier than actually going and installing the game. So far, it's seeming like the Wise 5060 is actually the better choice for old games. We'll see how the Source engine handles on it. However, it seems like Unreal Engine is best optimized for this GPU, or perhaps the graphics drivers are best optimized for Unreal Engine. I don't really know what way around it is. Alright, Mr. Freeman has a job to do. Ooh! The input lag is awful. Once again, I have a feeling that the video memory is the limiting factor here. So I absolutely 100% would recommend the Wise 5060 over this little Compaq system. This is on the verge in places of what I would no longer quite call playable. It's not horrendous. And if you were playing at a different resolution, like a little bit of a lower resolution, that would help. However, considering this computer is all around more expensive from its base price and the power consumption than the Wise 5060, I would absolutely not recommend this of the two. So that'll conclude it for our performance tests. Now let's discuss a little more. Well, she put up a good fight, but the newer Radeon card in the Wise 5060 thin client at the end of the day was just more powerful. Whether that be because of the unified shaders or newer API support or more VRAM or higher clocks, either way, the Wise 5060 comes out as the clear victor for older games. It's more power efficient and cheaper, so really, if all you're looking for is GPU performance, there's not really a reason to pick this guy over the Wise 5060. That said, this is not at all a bad computer. It's just maybe not quite for gaming. Both the Wise 5060 and this, for example, would be great home theater PCs or good for media playback, whether from local files or streaming. In fact, that is exactly what I used this for several months, actually. I used it with my projector to stream downloaded YouTube videos and local copies, like rips of movies, to my projector.
and it did a great job of it. There was no CPU performance issues because the GPU couldn't do hardware decoding. I only very recently replaced it with a slightly newer Intel NUC because the NUC had HDMI output, and my new expensive projector also, it had HDMI input. And since the DisplayPort on this didn't work, well, if I'd kept using VGA with my projector that cost $3,500 when it released, that'd be like buying a brand new Ferrari, like top model, and then removing 2/3 of the spark plugs. So, the point being, it may be a little dated when it comes to playing games, but this is pretty solid CPU performance that you're getting in a tiny box. So if you need it to, I don't know, run an external hard drive for a NAS setup, I can think of a lot of possibilities you could use this little guy for. So if you can find one of these for cheap, I absolutely recommend it. It's a very well built unit. It feels fantastic all around, and I would highly recommend one if you can find one for a good price. But that aside, it's quite an interesting machine, isn't it? Laptop RAM, laptop hard drive with a desktop socket at the heart of it. Well, that is where we're going to wrap up today's video because I've said about all I can about this little guy. So thank you everyone so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again next time.